All right, it's time to have a rundown of President Trump's legal issues because the Justice Department has issued a subpoena to the National Archives asking for all documentation involving former President Trump and his allies in the lead up to the January 6th Capitol riot. Now, this is completely different than the raid on the former president's home just 2 weeks ago. So let's take that and put it aside, okay? This doesn't have to do with the raid. It's hard to keep them straight. We're going to try. So the January 6th congressional hearings, we all know those were pretty toothless, right? They had no ability to punish anyone. They just wanted to sort of shape a narrative and push it all out to all of us. Whatever you did with that, as you were invited to think something of it, okay, right? But Congress doesn't have the ability to punish anyone. They just kind of wanted to highlight some things. But it seems like the Justice Department was like, yeah, okay, we'll look into that. Usually these congressional hearings, when they're like, oh, we're going to look into that, it's kind of a charade because the Justice Department is already looking into whatever this is. But in this case, it seems the committee did actually bring up things that the Justice Department hadn't seen yet. So they want their own copies. Now, one of the first things the January 6th committee did was subpoena the National Archives for all of the goings on around the president around this state. So now the Justice Department is doing the same thing because these two organizations can't just share documents like, hey, can we get a copy of that? So now the Justice Department has requested all materials in whatever form that the National Archives gave to the January 6th committee, including Trump's daily schedule, phone logs, and a draft of the speech written before the riot. So apparently there was the speech and there were drafts, and that might show something. Here, this is Thomas P. Wyndham. He's the head prosecutor that's been leading the investigation into Trump's participation in the January 6th events. Now, so that's one thing, right? Let's put that in our back pocket and move over to the investigation over Trump's classified documents that had to do with the raid on his home. This was about whether or not he had kept classified documents in his personal possession that should be kept by the National Archives. Now the former president is threatening to release footage from the raid that he took from his own private security cameras. And his son Eric said, you better believe we're going to do that. Let's hear him saying that.
You still have the surveillance tape. Is that correct? Are you allowed to share that with the country?
Absolutely, Sean, at the right time. And your body cam point was spot on. That's why cops wear body cams. They don't tell you to turn off cameras. They want transparency, and that's not what happened here.
Okay. Some are saying that they want to do this to rally up his supporters even more, because if there is evidence that the agents acted inappropriately, we, should collectively be upset about that. Now, the agents reportedly asked Trump's attorney to shut off surveillance cameras when they came into his house, and apparently the Trump team refused. So if they did, in fact, if that's true, right, then there might be some footage. If they did not refuse and they complied and turned those off, we don't know, right? Trump continues to maintain that he declassified the documents that were in his possession. So now activists are filing freedom of information requests to see those documents if that is indeed true. So that's an interesting turn, right? So if they were unclassified, then we all can ask for them. So now activists are looking into that. What we'll see about that, I'm not completely sure.
Well, they said, and they filed that call to activism. They're the one that broke that story, that side of the story, and saying because it's now declassified, we can reach out and file Freedom of Information Act requests.
Right. Since
the president declassified it, it should be available for everyone to see what it says.
Right.
Right. It's all redacted or not redacted. We can all see what it's going to say.
If that's true, right? If he unclassified that. But there are various levels, as we learned from the sort of receipt list, that there are various levels of classified. There's like top secret and unclassified and that kind of thing. But there's also sort of like personal notes that he maintains belong to him. I don't know if you can file a Freedom of Information Act, for instance, like a personal note from a fellow head of state that was sent to, say, President Obama? Could you do that?
I mean, it depends on the nature of it, and if it, releases state secrets, or if there's any kind of top secret information.
Right.
But the thing is, Bob Woodward covered these notes already in the book. I read his most recent book, or 2 years ago, his book on the last part of the Trump administration, and specifically talked about these North Korea letters and the Kim Jong-un letters, and that President Trump had great reverence for these letters and actually considered him a friend, and would often show them off to Bob Woodward. Like, look at these friends, like, look at these notes. He sends me personal letters, and and he took great pride in these letters. So Bob Woodward saw them. So I don't know how classified they just talked about friendship and how our countries can come together and things like that.
Interesting.
That's what the content of these letters was.
Okay. Now, meanwhile, the media is really trying its darndest to get its hands on the affidavit that was filed in support of the raid. So you recall the search warrant that we discussed. It referenced an affidavit that made the case that the raid was necessary in this surprise manner, but the affidavit was not made public. And now the media really wants to see it. Just today, there will be a hearing where all of these major newspapers and news outlets, including, we have a list here, we'll show you, the Associated Press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, major broadcast TV networks, CNN, and others, all want U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce E. Reinhart to release the affidavit. Now, the Justice Department will show up today and fight back because they do not want this. They say that the affidavit serves as a roadmap to this case, and it will not only compromise certain people, it will compromise the investigation, and it basically shows them everything they're looking at, why they're looking at those things, who said what, right? President Trump's legal team has not said if they're going to show up and get involved in this fight. It seems like they don't need to. He has said he wants the affidavit to be released, and the media is fighting with their biggest firepower to get a hold of it. And the Justice Department, I mean, everyone's putting their best into this, right? Everyone's given this all they've got. And it doesn't seem like the president's legal team needs to really make the case one way or the other, because I don't know.
Now, what I love is the liberal press comes out with these stories, which I'm always curious, like how they're verifying these stories, which is about, apparently President Trump is trying to ramp up his legal team, right? So he's making all sorts of phone calls to hire lawyers, and they're saying no. And so, first of all, how do they find this out?
Yeah,
Right?
this was a big theme on Rachel Maddow's show around the impeachment trials, that nobody...
She used to talk about this stuff,
like, this ran through her show for weeks on ends, that no major law firm would take this on. And it did feel very much as a way of conveying the message that the president is super screwed, that he has no leg to stand on, right? That no good lawyer would take this on. And I guess, I don't know, at the time I believed it. Now I don't see how that could be true, given how many people rally around President Trump.
Well,
how many people feel that this is personal? How many people feel that this is a witch hunt? And none of those people are attorneys, like, that would want this case, that would actually want to argue on behalf of someone.
Well,
who
also,
they
how do you
like?
verify a story like? So, I mean, are the law firms literally taking a phone call and saying no, and then they're running to the press to tell them no? I mean, is someone sitting there collating this information
and saying, "I turned down the president. I thought you should know."
I know, it's just ridiculous. It's one of those liberal stories that you just realize it doesn't pass the smell test. It's like the made up stories that they make up at the New York Times, and you're like, can we actually see the sources on this? Like, where are you getting your information? Oh, it turns out we made it up.
Yeah.
Which, that's happened plenty of times with these reporters that are never actually talked to anyone, and they just concocted stories. It's happened at the USA Today. It's happened in New York Times.
Well, because it sort of speaks to the narrative that anyone who supports Donald Trump is just not with it enough to play at this level of the justice system, right? Like, oh, sure, he's got plenty of, like, dumb supporters, but none of us, like, proper people in Washington would support this cause, right? It's a very elitist thread of thought.
Right.
Well,
Is it just coincidence that every time something like this happens, you look at the legislation that's being passed in the background, like this thing with the 87,000 new tax people coming in. It's like this is just perfect timing to get us distracted with all of this drama while they're secretly like making their plans to take more of our money.
It feels that way.
Of course, it's the control of the news cycle, right? And it's trying to look over here and not look over there, right? Like on the same day you're passing this, Joe Manchin comes out and basically admits that this does nothing to reduce inflation, and yet it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. But like, where's the stories on that? Yeah. Where's the questions on that? There's nothing. There's no question. The stories are, of course, about how this is going to benefit the climate and all of these other things. But another big piece of this story, this Trump story, is his former CEO of the Trump Organization.
Actually,
the CFO.
That's not a piece of this story. That's a completely separate story. So now we've been through two different legal battles that do not have to do with each other, right? Or do they, right? They're not supposed to, but completely separate matter is involving former President Trump's CFO of the Trump Organization, Allen Weisselberg. Weisselberg, sorry. He pled guilty today to tax violations in the Manhattan District Attorney case against him and the Trump Organization. So this is completely separate thing, right?
So he flipped. This is the argument. He flipped.
He did not flip.
Oh, he didn't?
No. So he pled guilty to 15 different felonies. And as a part of the plea, he will have to agree to testify at the trial. But he has said he's not testifying. He has only said he will testify honestly. And he's willing to go to prison rather than actually, like, he's not. So
he's not going to be a rat. He'll do 5 months in prison.
He will receive up to 5 months in prison. So, I mean, it's interesting because different media organizations are calling it different things. He pled guilty, but he is not actually implicating the president, but he will have to testify at the trial. And he will also be forced to pay back nearly $2 million in taxes. Now, this was an investigation over whether or not he had taken compensation from the Trump Organization and not claimed it on his taxes. Some of those things were actually like things that he was taking, and some of them were like limo services or, and so now they are saying the Trump Organization did the same thing. He will have to testify at the trial in October. But I think many people are calling this a loyalty move, saying he's willing to plead guilty and testify honestly, but he's not actually going to give them Trump.
Well, he's 75 or something. So he's going to get 5 months, but actually they're going to put him in Rikers, they said. Rikers prison.
Well,
that's not a place you want to be.
Oh, wow. I was just getting ready to say, like, generally these guys go to federal prison, which is basically like Club Med. And if you happen to be there at the same time as Martha Stewart, you probably eat well. But I don't remember if you remember Goodfellas, where they were like making spaghetti and had all the garlic in the federal prison. It's like a totally different life than our prisons.
Well, now, today, trending on Twitter is the verb Epsteined.
Epsteined.
Because people worry that he could face a similar fate when he gets to this 5-month sentencing. So it's interesting. I see in the chat room are saying, yeah, that's flipping. I think a lot of people, okay, it's nuance.
Well, because if you flip, if he's making a plea agreement where he's going to then release information, right? I mean, if he's pleading guilty, it could be that he's not releasing any information, that he's just pleading guilty so they don't have to waste the state's money to go through a whole trial, right? So that could be where his plea agreement, he'd get a reduced sentence if he just agrees to it. That they don't have to spend taxpayer dollars to put on a whole trial, like get a jury and do all of that, right? That could be the plea agreement. But another part of the plea agreement could, in fact, be that he will
continue to hand over information.
Right.
The deal said he must testify truthfully at the trial. It did not say continue to cooperate. So I don't know. Some are saying this is a testament to his loyalty to Trump, and some are saying no, this testifying at all will be damning.
All of this move by, you want to call it a witch hunt, whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't matter what you call it. Well, what it does is it makes Donald Trump way more powerful, way more powerful. So if
You
you're,
think? I mean, these are
Yeah, I mean, look at the amount
really
of-
painful battles for him to be fighting, though. I mean, he can act like he's, like Kim Iverson said on our show recently, I think he's scared. I think these are awful things to be facing for any human being.
But
and I think whether he did these things or not, whether he deserves it or not, it is a firestorm.
It's hard to say if he's scared. I mean, who knows what's inside the mind of somebody, right? But he's been dealing with this kind of stuff since the 1980s.
This is really hot, though. These
Well,
are
and I was gonna say, like, it's more like maybe it's his ego that he feels is damaged, because everything that happens, every time they try to do this, he comes out even better off than he was before. Every single time, it's like they don't learn, and I think that he just doesn't like when his ego, because like like initially, yes, some of that information is like because people think that is what happened, so he does have to prove the other thing. But again, I think just like everything else, he's going to come out on top of this.
Yeah, I mean, unless they go for the jugular and try to find a way that they can't let him run, and if that happens, you're looking for a full scale like revolt in the United States. This is where we talk about
But
civil
again,
war, right?
it's the Constitution that says who can run, not Congress.
Right.
So even though they're saying that some of the penalty for these laws, for breaking these laws that were voted in by Congress, would be the inability to run for public office again, that could set up a Supreme Court trial over who actually is eligible to run for president, because it's constitutional, right? So that would be tried at the highest level, and we see which way the court is bent right now. It seems to me that court would vote to allow him to run.
Yeah, absolutely. I just don't see. I mean, he's made enormous amounts of money from fundraising.
Yes.
So over the past 2 weeks, this has been a record amount of money. That he's never raised this much money. So people see this as an outrage, and the fact that you even have like some liberals in the media saying, like, they're like, I hate Trump. They're like, I can't stand the guy. I think he's arrogant. Blah blah blah. But this was an overreach. You know, like when you have, you even have like liberals defending this or saying that this is bad. You know it's bad.
Well, in his hardcore base, it's not going to matter what they find anyway. His support's going to go up with his base regardless.
Right. Well, remember he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't care.
I mean, we haven't even talked about the Attorney General case that he's facing in the state of New York over inflated or deflated property values. That's another case that will go forward. That he refused to testify in his deposition recently. So these are all like at the highest level of firepower that the government has to throw at this guy. And yes, we all should be subject to a rule of law, right? And some of these seem more legitimate than others. Amidst all of this, interestingly, recently defeated Senator Liz Cheney says that since she lost her election, she's going to start up an organization specifically aimed at educating Republicans against supporting former President Trump. She's calling this the Great Task, right? So Republicans, turn away from this guy. He's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. This document we just showed you was the name of her new super PAC and the filing for the super PAC. And she's also considering using it as a launch pad to run for president. So, okay,
Wait,
go right ahead and do that.
I thought they couldn't start super PACs themselves. So she started the super PAC? Like, I thought super PACs they couldn't be involved in.
I think you're right, but maybe because she lost election, she can sort of, because this is an organization that she's starting. Her name is on it.
Gotcha.
Anyway, what's interesting to me about this is that, right, she then in this speech yesterday, in her concession speech, compared herself to Abraham Lincoln, which is always rule number one. In politics, you don't compare yourself to Abraham Lincoln. She said, Abraham Lincoln lost so many elections before he won the big one. So here I am losing this election, and maybe I'll become, like Abraham Lincoln, and I'll become your next president of the United States. I mean, think about.
It's a market. It's a, non-Trump Republican market. It seems to not be super successful given the outcome of her election, but I can see.
Well, yeah, how could you? Sorry, I was going to say, how could you want to even walk back into that world when you lost by like 40 points? Like, That's insane. Like they called it after only 4% reported it was so bad.
Yeah.
When you
It
think about
does-
it, I mean, we don't need more neoconservatives, right? Like
No.
we get rid of these neoconservatives, get rid of the Adam Kinzingers, get rid of these people who want us to continue these endless wars and warmongers like her dad. I mean, the fact that like Democrats are normalizing Liz Cheney with these. I saw a piece, I think it was in Time Magazine or something yesterday that said Liz Cheney didn't lose. She won in the right way. Okay. So she lost. That's how you spin it. You lost the election, but she won in the ways that matter. That was how it was said. She won in the ways that matter. Like, what is that? What is that exactly? She voted.
Fundraising?
Okay. I don't get it. I mean, she literally voted with Trump 93% of the time. Like if you look at her voting record, 93% of the time. She almost never voted against a Trump agenda item at all. So this January 6th thing, and that she can hang her hat on, is not, and then that's where I think she saw an opening.
Yes, that's what I think too.
So I think, if anything, and then you have people like Andrew Yang praising her. And I think, again, warmongers, you look past it. You look past voting for endless wars. She's a neoconservative from the, a pure blood neoconservative. These are people we don't need in Washington. And maybe she could run with like a Democratic ticket. Like maybe like,
Well, have you ever watched,
I don't know, her and,
have you ever
Kamala or
watched The Boys? Like, do you understand the premise of The Boys? Have you watched that?
No.
Where it's like it's these heroes, right? And they have like social scores. So it's like if the community is liking what they're doing and stuff, they get more advertising and stuff. And it's almost like these politicians, the more popular they become by making these statements, the more money they can get in the higher paying jobs they can secure after they leave office. And it's almost like she used that January 6th thing as a way to promote her brand in order to make her more palatable for bigger money.
Oh, post Washington. Yeah.
Yeah, post Washington.
Have her think tank, have her organization raise money, be a liaison for the deep state military industrial complex, just following the footsteps of her father, Darth Vader himself. So yeah, that's probably true. But she says she's going to run for president. We'll see. And the thing is, a number of Democrats will vote for her. There's plenty of primaries where you don't have to be a party affiliated to vote in the primary. So if you're going to vote against Donald Trump, you can do that as a Democrat in certain states where you don't have to have party affiliation on the ballot. That would be an interesting strategy on the Democratic side. So it'll be interesting to see what Liz Cheney does.
But she may also be banking on the fact that like there will be some kind of great fall of Donald Trump, and then if that happens, she'll be waiting in the wings with a big "I told you so, I'm still here" kind of,
Right.
So it's a gamble.